Being a single mom and doing it all by yourself is brutal. Learn the brain and energy tools to get back to your center and overcome your challenges. Welcome to Single Moms Doing It All. This is Muriel, your host, and today I have a guest with me. But before I tell you all about him, I want to remind you that if you are on my email list, you know that I started a clubhouse. I started a club in Clubhouse called Conscious Parent, and I will put the invitation in my Facebook group. So join us, come participate in rooms and events we're going to have. I'm holding this Friday at 7:30 a.m. Actually, the interview will be published later, but it will be an ongoing thing. On Fridays at 7:30 a.m. Pacific time, we're going to do meditation and intention. So if that's appealing to you, join us. Today, my guest is Eric Almeida, and I'm going to introduce him quickly, but he will tell you more about himself. Eric is the founder and CEO of Eric EFT, an organization dedicated towards self-fulfillment. He has the unique ability to accompany his client through the process of releasing the emotional weight from their past and being able to embrace their strength and passion with dignity. He's a lover of EFT tapping, so I know I do too. And today we're going to talk about more specifically because he helps people in the LGBTQIA community with their journey. Let's leave it at that. Good morning, Eric. How are you?
Good. How are you, Muriel?
I'm great. I'm terrific. I'm happy to have you here today. So before we go with other questions, I'm curious, what led you to do what you're doing today, and more specifically, working with the LGBTQIA community?
Absolutely. So the way I got connected with EFT, with the emotional freedom technique, was 2 years ago. I was working in subsidized housing, very technical work, very, government paperwork and all that kind of jazz. And, it made me have a very strong distance from the residents there. I had to have, the strong customer service facade. And for me personally, that was actually incredibly unhealthy because I had been suppressing my emotions for so much of my life. And so great for customer service, terrible for mental health. And so I was at work and doing a normal recertification, nothing out of the ordinary. And I just feel like something was wrong. I just felt like almost like I was sick. And so I was in the middle of an appointment. So I left, I excused myself and I went to my boss and I'm like, hey, can you cover this? I'm like, I just don't feel good. And she was like, yeah, don't worry about it. So I went into the maintenance office to kind of just walk away. And I felt terrible. And my heart started racing. I started feeling numbness in my hands and in my feet. And I'm just starting to I break out into a cold sweat and I'm like, oh my God, I think I'm having a heart attack. And so I'm not that old.
Yeah.
At the time I'm 33. So it seemed unlikely, but that's what it felt like. And so I pick up the phone to call 911 and it doesn't work. It's one of those voice over IP phones, like at offices. You have to turn the 911 feature on. So I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, I need my cell phone. And it was still in my office. So I try to compose myself. I walk back into my office. I grab my cell phone. And as I'm walking out, I whisper into my boss's ear, I'm like, I'm calling an ambulance. I think I'm having a heart attack. And she, to her credit, was cool as a cucumber and was like, you do what you have to do. And so I call the ambulance and they send someone over. And right after I hang up with the 911 operator, I end up calling my husband. It goes to voicemail and I leave him a message basically saying goodbye because by that point I was really freaking out. And he did not
You probably
appreciate that
freaked out.
message. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, I freaked him out too. And I hang up with the voicemail and then I'm sitting in the maintenance office. I put my head on the desk, and then just fluids are flowing out of my face. Just I'm crying and snot and drool. It's gross. And the numbness had completely gotten my legs and my arms, and my my vision started to tunnel like you're about to faint. And I don't know how much time passed before the paramedics popped through the door, and they're like, are you Eric? What's going on? What's happening? So they put the blood oxygen clip on my finger. They put the blood pressure cuff on my arm. They check my vitals and all that kind of jazz. And they were like, okay, we've got good news and we have bad news. The good news is you're not having a heart attack. The bad news is you're having a panic attack. And I'm just like, oh, dear God. And to their credit, they were able to calm me down with some breathing techniques. They explained to me what the numbness was because I was hyperventilating. I threw off my blood oxygen levels. And so it was causing the numbness. So they're like, that's all normal because of just the hyperventilating. Once you breathe again, your feeling will come back, which it did. My husband calls me. He's like, oh my God, what's going on? And I'm like, it's a panic attack. I'm okay. Can you come pick me up from work? Which he does. And so, the paramedics offered to take me to the hospital. I'm like, no, I'm fine. And so I take the next day off. I treat it like a fluke. I treat it like, this is weird. I don't know why this happened. Like, I just need to go back to living my life like I was. And so 2 days after, I go back to work and I walk into my office again, and all of those feelings start coming back. And I'm like, nope, I can't be here. And so I bolt out of the office. I actually drove past my boss as I left. And I text her and I'm like, I'm still not feeling up to it. I'll try again tomorrow. The next day comes. I only get about halfway down on the highway before I turn around, before those feelings start coming back. And I'm just like, I'm saying to myself, this is bad. This is really bad. And I hadn't realized up until that point that I was really white knuckling it through life, that I had so much old emotional baggage that I had been ignoring for a long time. I knew it was there. It would pop up and say hello a lot of the times, but I was ignoring it. And it got to the point where I couldn't hold it all back anymore. And so I ended up taking a leave of absence from that job. And my symptoms actually got worse very quickly. I ended up becoming agoraphobic. So I got scared to leave my house.
Wow.
I couldn't go to the grocery store. I actually confined myself to one room in my house for a while. Like the downstairs bedroom, I was completely mentally shattered. I was alternating between being completely depressed and hysterically crying. And my husband would do his best to console me, but he's just kind of like, I don't know what's happening.
Not equipped.
Yeah, not equipped. Exactly. And so I had a connection with a therapist colleague of mine. And I reached out to her and I'm like, hey, Sarah, I'm like, this is what happened. I need your help. Do you have time in your schedule and can we do it over the phone? And she said, yeah, absolutely. We can do both of that. And she is a therapist who had incorporated the emotional freedom technique into her practice. Okay. And so I work with her for a while. And after about a month or so, the agoraphobia goes away and I start seeing her in person. I ended up realizing that I needed to just leave the job altogether.
And so that's why I kind of knew that's where you were going, and your body was just talking to you.
Yes, exactly. Like as crazy as it sounds, I'm incredibly grateful for what happened because some part of me knew that I would not deal with my past until I had no choice. And this panic attack was basically my mind and my body coming up behind me with a bat and saying, you have no choice, whack, and taking me out.
Because it starts with a whisper, but if you don't listen, it ends up kicking you on the floor.
Yes, exactly. So I end up continuing to work with Sarah. And so this was the summer of 2018. By the end of that year, I ended up getting the courage to actually start my own business. I ended up opening up an antique store. And it was kind of my when I retire jobs, and I'm like, why not do it now? And this is my first avenue into being an entrepreneur. And I ran the antique store up until March of 2020. And I closed it right before the shutdown happened here in Massachusetts with COVID. It wasn't financially viable. If I had more funds, I might have been able to get it to work, but the pandemic would have killed it anyway.
Yeah.
And so I got out just in time. And in the middle of all of the full lockdown, another colleague of mine became a certified EFT practitioner. And I was like, wait, how did you do that? I'm like, do you have a master's? Like, what's going on? And I contacted her and I contacted my former therapist because by that point I had stopped working with her. And I asked, like, how does this work? And so they're like, oh, no, you don't need a master's or anything like that. You know, it's its own certification process. You take
Yeah.
these courses, and then you also have training and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm like, let me see if this is something I want to do. I still wasn't sure if I was mentally strong enough to handle mental health work. I had gotten my bachelor's degree in psychology with the intention of becoming a clinician. But when I worked in the field right after college at 21, 22, I was still too emotionally fragile at that time. And I walked away from it and ended up going into a whole slew of other kinds of jobs. So when I took the training, I was like, this is it. Like, this is what I want to do. This technique has helped me so much. And I want to give the gift that this technique has given to me to other people. Because the person that I am today, the person that I am talking to you, is nothing compared to the person I was before the panic attack or even years ago. I would never be sharing this story. I would be panicking my ass off about doing a podcast. I would have been sick for a week before this and probably would have bailed. Like a lot of self-confidence issues that had been, a lot of it been resolved with the EFT work. And so I ended up getting certified towards the end of 2020, and I've been, hanging my shingle ever since and building up my practice. And so to answer your question as to my connection with the LGBTQIA plus community, which I'm going to refer to as the gay community for short, it's too many letters, is, as a gay man, it's a unique experience for sure. The gay community in its entirety, we are a minority of sorts. There's not a lot of us. The statistics kind of vary a lot. Like in the sexual orientation world, if you're not heterosexual, you're roughly 7 to 9% of the population. In the gender identity world, it's like 1% or so that's outside of cisgender. So this is a very small community when you're comparing it to to all of humanity. And I just remember when I was younger trying to figure out who I was, what I was, and what was going on. So like, for me, I grew up I was a 90s kid. I was born in 85. I was a 90s kid. I graduated from high school in 03. This is at a time, so for pop culture references, Will and Grace didn't start till 1999. The Ellen show got canceled because she came out as gay around that same time as well. So this is long before, the gay best friend was like an archetype in every single media thing you could find nowadays, which is, positive change for the times. And so it was also a time where calling anything that was dumb or stupid gay was popular. And so me being a nerdy kid, I was called gay a lot because I wasn't popular, and then people didn't realize they were pushing a button that was there.
Yeah.
And so I want to be able to give back to the community by being part of it, by understanding it to a degree. Like I'm cisgender, so I have sympathy for the transgender community, but I'm not a member of it technically. But I still do understand the process of feeling like you don't belong, feeling like you're different and you don't know why, and being very lost as to what's going on. And, as more accepting as society is, there are still lots of pockets where there's still a lot of resistance. I've had clients who are part of the LGBT plus community who have come to me because therapists or mental health workers that they've worked with in the past, they've picked up on their own biases coming from the person that's trying to help them. And some of it can, not all of it is, flat out like, conversion therapy, like, something is wrong for being gay, but there can be a lot of the subtleties of like, of questioning a little bit too much and things, or just really like, are you sure, when the person's been in committed relationships for years and things like that. And it's like, questioning someone when they're young is a little bit more normal. It's like, okay, why are you feeling like this? What's going on? That's kind of fine when you're talking about someone who's coming of age and in general. But when someone, when it's an adult, when it's a 20, 30, 40, 50-year-old who's embraced their sexuality and then they're still being questioned, it's like, no, there's something wrong there. So there aren't a lot of people, there aren't a lot of mental health workers who are part of the community. There's plenty who support it, which is great, and that is starting to grow. But I just wanted to be that a comforting voice, because it's like, I understand because I lived it. And
Yes.
yes, younger kids are having a different experience than I did, and older adults had a different experience than I did as well. But there's still that same similarity of like, we've all gone through the war. We've all been in the closet. We've all had to fight our way out of the closet. We've all had to go through some kind of coming out process and deal with the fallout, whatever it is,
Yeah.
and then live our life as who we are. And it's a very unique experience.
And that's why I wanted you here today, because I help moms. And as a mom, I'm not equipped if one of my kids were gay, because for a while we asked ourselves about my son, but it ended up being that he's not. But I remember at the time I was like, okay, I have no problem with it, but I'm sure there is a way to facilitate the coming out for a mom and a way to make it more difficult, because there there are people who are more accepting today, like I see with my kids. My latest one is 17, so they are more accepting, but there is still a lot of resistance from some people. And
Sure.
as a mom, I don't know what to say, what to do to make the experience a better one. And that's why I was curious about how, I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about how it
Ask
went for
away.
you.
Yeah, ask whatever you want.
So, how did it go with your parents when you came out? Was there a lot of resistance? What helped you and what didn't help you?
So my parents were very ignorant towards the gay world. And I'm very, how do I want to say this? I'm very purposeful when I use the term ignorant, because they were incredibly unaware that gay people existed, let alone anything that
Oh,
involved with it. They were very blind towards it. And with ignorance comes things that could be said or actions that can be done that can be unintentionally hurtful.
yes.
So there's a big difference. So that's why I make the distinction between ignorance versus hatred. Hatred is, that
Yeah.
you hate, you want destruction or death or dismay for someone, and ignorance is, I just don't know what the hell you're talking about, and they might say things that might be hurtful.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of, it was rough in when they first found out. I wasn't really 100% ready for them to know. And I myself was also still very fragile. And so I wasn't strong enough to process the ignorance without me having emotional upheaval myself.
How old
And
were
so
you?
I came out when I was 21.
Okay.
So, which is a little bit later by today's standards, but for my time,
It
oh my
was.
God, it makes me sound so old. Back
Well, don't worry.
back
I'm
in the
older. I'm older than you.
Yeah, yeah. So back in the early 2000s, that's slightly later, but not. It was people were starting to come out a little bit younger than that, but not too much younger compared to today, where you're having kids coming out at like 10, which is crazy, which is great, but it's
Yeah.
it's it's kind of like, oh wow. So yeah, it was certainly tough, and a big part of it with my particular situation was a lot of it was just education of me explaining to them that, like, you know, I still want to find a partner. I still want to be in a committed relationship. I still want to have a family. You know, at the moment, my husband and I don't want kids. I don't know if we ever will have kids, but we still have our family,
Yeah.
we're married and things like that. And so there was a lot of, like, that I'm still pretty, it's still kind of, a lot of it's kind of the same, but obviously there's some differences. And then for them, it was just them understanding that this was a thing and that it existed. I like, I remember a couple of weeks after my parents found out, my mom gives me a call and she was like, I was out to dinner with your father and I saw this couple and it was a gay couple. And I'm like, I'm looking around the restaurant, I'm like, there's gay people everywhere. And I'm just like, oh my God. I'm like, yes, there's gay people everywhere. They were always there. You just never saw them. And
Ah,
so it was a lot of, it was a, like, there was a, I'm saying the funny ones. I'm purposely not repeating the rougher ones because things are much better with my parents. They were at my
ah.
wedding and very accepting. It was just in the beginning, there was a lot of landmines that they
It was a
stepped on. They didn't know.
process. Yeah.
It was a process. Yeah. Like another example, another funny one from my mom was, she was like, did watching Will and Grace make you gay? And I'm like, no,
Okay.
I watched Will and Grace because I am gay. There's a difference there. And so it's like I said, ignorance.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to what a parent does in those kinds of situations is the number one thing that a parent can say to a kid who doesn't know gender identity or sexual orientation it's irrelevant, is to affirm to the child that I love you no matter what,
Yeah.
and that I will
Okay.
be here as you figure this out. And if the parent doesn't know, just own it. Just own it. Just say to your kid, this is new to me and it's new to you. So I love you, I care about you, and if there are times where I say or do things that might be hurtful, tell me, but I don't mean it to be hurtful. I'm learning as I'm figuring this out too. Like I'm not like just like you're trying to figure out if you're gay or if you're trans or whatever, I'm also trying to learn to be a parent of someone who is gay or trans or any of those. So that is like, if you can convey that piece of information, I love you no matter what, and I'll be with you on this journey, everything else you'll figure out. And yes, you're going to make mistakes. Yes, you might say things that come across as hurtful unintentionally. Yes, it might be really shocking. Yes, it might be really confusing for the parent as it is for the kid. That's all normal. It's all normal. It's in a lot of ways, it's the same. It's the same thing that happens with any parent-child relationship where the child is, after a certain, in the beginning, when they're really young, they are just an extension of the parent. They're dependent on the parent. They're attached to the parent. The love is constant and unconditional. But then, when puberty kicks in, then
Oh, yeah.
you get yeah, exactly. The expression, the whole like, oh God, it's the child is becoming more of who they're developing an individual personality separate from the
Yes,
parents. That's a painful process for both.
it is. Yeah.
And
And it's confusing for both too.
absolutely. And parents don't get a handbook when they have a kid. They figure it out on their own.
I
And
wish.
parents, yeah, I know everyone wishes. There is no right way to raise a child. There's a lot of wrong ways, but there's no right way to raise a child.
It's an
And there's no,
adaptation. It's like you said, I think the strongest force of all is love. So as
yes,
long as the kid knows that this is safe, it's there, then it can propel them to where into their journey. But as a mother, I know that when you don't feel equipped, I had stuff with my kids that are I was not equipped, and I had very, very difficult life and death stuff where I was not equipped. But because I went through, like you said, your experience was very painful, but you're thankful that you went through that because you had to go through that to become who you are today and to
yes,
embrace your purpose in the world. Same thing with me. I was down into a depression, and thank God for that depression, which forced me to do life in another way, because after that there was something very, very a suicidal attempt in my house where I would not have had the strength if I was the old me. and same for you. Um, what helped you? So there is the parent,
Mhm.
but what helped you as far as concept or ideas, or yeah, some kind of knowing that you had, maybe that helped you navigate that journey? Like, so you knew your parents loved you and that was already safe, but was there something else that your parents transmitted to you that made it safer? Like maybe their willingness to learn, I don't know.
It's things got rough enough where I did question their love for me.
Okay.
It got bad. It got very dark for a while. And so that was hard. What got me through that was that I had friends who were loyal to me and who supported me. And at the end of the so at the end of the day, like I'm
Maybe that was
they
not
never so I may have questioned it, but the one thing they never did was that they never crossed that line of saying we want nothing to do with you.
okay.
They never went that far. Yes, there was arguments, yes, there were misunderstandings, yes, there was yelling and things like that. A lot of that happened, but there was never a I don't want you as my kid.
Yeah.
So but it was still obviously quite rough. So in that regard, from if I'm giving advice to a parent who's in the middle of all of that, that's a tough one to say. It's
Yeah, because it's individual, right?
it's very individual.
That maybe let's rephrase that in a way that is
Well,
easier.
sure, go ahead.
um, because now you work with people too, so you
Mhm,
have the example of the people that you worked with.
mhm.
What did you see in your clients to tell the parents not to do, even if it's something like that they don't necessarily do it with a mean intention, but that they did because they were ignorant or unequipped? Can you pinpoint like 2 or 3 things to not do as a parent so that we can avoid them for the people who are listening?
Yeah, so you need to continue to verbally say to your kid that you love them. Don't assume they know that. Keep saying it. Even in the middle of fighting with them, keep saying it. That's one thing. Trying to think the others. It definitely would help to verbalize the fact, like I kind of said before, that you as the parent are still processing this. It's the need for love from a parent is so vital to all of us. We're
Yeah,
all children at the
yeah.
end of the day, that the reaction a parent has right away when they discover it or when they're told, that reaction is hard to control. But a parent's reaction immediately as they're discovering it, if the reaction is of disgust or of ugh or any of that, those are deep wounds that are happening live. I don't know how a parent could stop that from happening if that is an organic reaction. I don't know. But what can be done, what a big thing I would say to parents would be, if you feel if you realize that you went too far, if you realize, oh my god, I didn't mean to say that, or it didn't come out the way I meant to say it, you need to own that as soon as you can with the kid. with your child. Like if you say, something hurtful, there's, it gets into a fight and the kid runs off or whatever like that, or storms off to the room or whatever like that. Let the energy cool down and then go to the kid and be like, I did not mean to say it like that, or I didn't realize that was so hurtful. Like you got, as the parent, you need to own your own mistakes.
So,
You're
so
the adult, assuming your child is still a child at the time. Yeah.
So it's even more important in that case, because that's something we need to do as parents anyway, to be mature enough emotionally, to be at a higher maturity level than our kid or our teen. And even if sometimes it's not that easy, because when we're triggered, we regress,
Yes.
to make sure that we apologize for anything that would have came out wrong. And yeah, that's something that anyway we have to do as parents. I think maybe because I know in my house, as a mother, I'm a single mom, I ask myself a lot of questions on a lot of things. And because my kids are very open and we talk a lot about so many things. So the subject of being gay came out, of course, in the discussions, because that's something we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And before I would even talk to my kid, I would ask yourself the question and wonder, where do you stand on that matter, even if there is yet no need or even no signs or anything. I think it's healthy to know where you stand on certain topics, so that you can avoid what you were talking about, the organic reaction. You can train your brain to get used to an idea that your kid could be completely different from you. um, I had to do it at a certain level. It's not comparable, but I'm Jewish. And like you were saying, for example, the ignorance, I got a lot of that. Is a little bit in America, but when I was in Europe, a lot. Like, oh, how come you don't have the nose? Or oh, I thought you were going to borrow my camera, because as a Jew, you should take every opportunity to take things from people. Stuff like that, stupid jokes or
Oh
stupid
God.
remarks.
Yeah. It's
People, and then
stupid.
I
Yeah.
pointed it out, and the person said, oh, I didn't mean it like that. And I said, yeah, but be careful, because that's where you're going with that. So asking yourself, I asked myself, what if my kids decide to throw away my Judaism and do whatever they want? I had to ask myself, if they're completely different from me, how will I react? And because I prepared myself in that way on several topics, you react with more mastery. You can even tap on it as a
Mm-hmm.
parent. Tap on, my kid is different, I'm afraid, I don't know what to do. I think that would help, don't you think?
Absolutely. And a big thing too, as well, just to be clear, that's a lot of pressure for a parent to be able to have that kind of insight ahead of time before getting thrown what could be perceived as a bombshell on the parent. At the end of the day, go back to the fundamental thing I said: convey to your child that you love them, and then just own the fact that you're a human being. You're figuring things out as well, and just say, this caught me by surprise. I wasn't expecting this. It doesn't mean I don't love you. It's just I have to learn what it means to be the mom or the dad of a gay kid or a trans kid or whatever, and just own own your own the humanity that you have,
Okay.
and convey that to your child, because just like a parent needs to learn that their children are going to become their own individual people,
Yeah.
children need to learn that their parents are just people as well.
Yes.
They have to learn that their parents aren't perfect, and that is an interesting transition from when a child becomes an adult, as is the same transition from when an adult needs to learn that their children that they've cared for since birth are now becoming adults and individual people as well. So fundamentally, keep the communication open and be honest, and just own any mistakes you might make, and just say, I didn't mean it to be hurtful. It wasn't meant to hurt you. It just, I don't know much about this, and
Yeah.
this is what little I know, so I'm sorry. And I would say the same thing to the kid. I would say to the kid, if your parents don't know much about the gay world, you be prepared to you're going to have to educate them, and that there's going to be times where they stumble. So like just like with you, where you were giving those examples of like the jokes when it comes to being a Jewish woman, like I have the same stuff as a gay man. Like on my honeymoon, we went to Vegas actually, and as we arrived at the airport, we get in the cab to go to the hotel, and the cabbie is just talking to us like they normally do. And then he asked like, "Oh, what brings you here?" And I'm like, "Oh, we're on our honeymoon." And the very next question he asks is, "Oh, so who's the man and who's the woman?"
Oh,
And it's like, you don't ask that question. And so, but once again, that distinction, hatred and ignorance. The cab driver was just being ignorant. The way he asked was literally just, he was just curious. And so, I responded back sternly, but not, I didn't rip his head off, but like sternly of like, that's an inappropriate question to ask a gay person. Don't ever ask that again. And he was like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. And then like, he just kept going on, and we had as pleasant of a conversation after that as you could. So
so
like I said, it's ignorance versus hatred. It's a difference for sure.
so what I see the need to do for a parent based on what you just said is first admit that you're not perfect, and it gives permission to your kid to be imperfect too. Embrace
Yes.
your humanness. And the second thing is they will probably encounter ignorance in the way that, without being malignant, but just ignorant people, to prepare them and have a comeback. Like you said, for example, that's an inappropriate question, don't
Mm-hmm.
ask. So prepare your kid for things like that and give them a way to somehow, because for me, I teach a lot about emotional reaction. I do tapping like you, and I
Mm-hmm.
teach a lot about brain training, because when you train your brain to have a certain reaction that serves you better, you will perform better most of the time. So prepare your kid to train themselves to not be so triggered, because that way their experience will be easier, and just have some prepared reactions that will set a boundary, because they need to be respected, but without being too crazy about it. I think that would help, right?
Yes. So that is another classic conflict that happens between parents and children. And this is outside of the LGBT plus community as well. Children, as they are growing up, are wanting to express themselves, and they're wanting to express themselves without any restrictions.
Mhm.
And parents try to temper their children so that they don't do anything completely off the wall. So like the classic example, to use a pretty innocent and cute example, would be like letting the 7-year-old dress themselves for school. The parent needs to make sure the kid's still wearing pants and underwear and a shirt and some shoes. If it happens to be a Batman outfit,
Yeah.
oh well. So like it's that same like so the same level of temperance still needs to happen. So like if a 14-year-old was coming out and was saying, I want to go to a gay club, I, as an adult, as a 35-year-old adult male, adult gay man, I'd be like, that's a bit intense. I
Yeah.
wouldn't take you to a bar.
Too young.
So, so I would be like, in that instance, I wouldn't just, I would be like, that's, you're too young to even go.
Yeah.
But why do you want to go?
Yeah.
And so, and that could be one of those things where and then you kind of have to like, if they're, is it them wanting to connect with a community?
Mm.
Is it them wanting, is it them wanting to
Okay.
just get exposure and things like that? And like that part of that is just saying, if you're looking for a community, we can find you one that is age appropriate.
Yeah.
But you're 14, I wouldn't let you go to a bar, period. You know, same thing in regards to the transgender community. And this is somewhat controversial, and I'm going to jump on this landmine because some parents do need to hear this, and some of them might completely disagree with me, and they're more than
Yeah.
fine. Unlike with unlike with the with differences in sexuality, that's primarily experience, and you still want to temper experience to a degree. You don't want a 13 or 14-year-old having sex that young. Potentially that could have its own interesting impacts. But with the transgender community, you do want to be careful before jumping straight into doing anything that is
Permanent.
biologically permanently
Yeah.
altering them.
Yeah.
And so some people nowadays are saying, you know, the moment a person says they want to transition, to let them. In my personal opinion, I would temper that a little bit. A little bit. There's a difference between there, if I have a client who is 21 who believes they're trans, who is 18 who believes they're trans, who is 16 who believes they're trans, and who is 12 who believes they're trans, I'm going to have a very different set of advice for the four of them. The 18 and the 21-year-old, they're already adults. They're young, but they're already adults. And I would counsel them through that process. And if they get to the point where they want to make alterations to their body and hormones and surgeries, I will support them through that when they're ready for it emotionally. But the 16 and the 12-year-old, especially the 12-year-old, this is a young child. And things like puberty blockers have permanent effects. So
Yeah.
it's not immune, So in that regard, once again, I would recommend, from a parental perspective, I would recommend a level of temperance, of let them explore their gender identity in
Yeah.
a way that isn't permanent. So, let them experiment with dressing as the sex that they believe that they are. Let them
Yeah.
change their hair. Let them
Yeah.
dye their hair. Things like that. Those are kind of fine. They're not permanent biological changes, and psychologically they're not so much, because sometimes a person may think they are trans, or may think they are
Yeah.
gay or bisexual or any of the others, and then they discover that they're not. Or maybe they think they're bisexual, and they're actually gay, or maybe they think they're gay and they're actually bisexual, or or they might be, they're
And
still figuring out who they are.
and that's what happened in my house, because I think my son was 10, and he talked to my daughter, and he said, because what I love in this generation is that they're so much more free with their feelings. Like
Mm-hmm.
between boys, they would tell them I love you, they would hug each other. So, and something that the previous generation had so much problems doing, so much
Yep.
of bury your emotion if you're a boy. So at a certain point, he told my daughter that he loved his friend, and he said, do you think mom would still love me if I was gay? Because he didn't know it was love, and he didn't know what
Mm-hmm.
it meant.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, my daughter told me that, and I didn't tell my son that I knew, but I made sure to say in conversation that no matter who they are, what they decide with their life, their sexual orientation, I would love them, so that the message will go through without him knowing that I knew. But
Yes.
it was a period of confusion that lasted maybe a few months to a year. And then he ended up not being gay. But there was that confusion. He didn't know, because he felt something that he didn't know what it was. So in a case of permanent alterations to your body, and you could avoid, there is that period of confusion that you need to go through, and let them go through it until they're sure.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. So going with the example with your son, he's a 10-year-old boy. He is in the process of learning the difference between paternal love, sibling love, friend love, and romantic love.
Yeah.
It's all the same word, but they all mean very different things. And so all he knew was he had this strong emotional attachment to his friend who is a boy. And so he was like, oh, I love him. Just like I care about my friend as much as I care
Yeah.
about my sister, or I care about my parents. So then he was like, oh my God, does that mean I'm gay? And it's like, not necessarily.
Yeah.
It's just he's your best friend. He's your closest friend. And yeah, you love him. Does that mean you sexually love him? I don't know. You're 10. I don't know you. Let's just see what happens. We'll
Yeah.
see what happens. So it's the same thing with gender identity. Fundamentally, every single human being has the traits of both genders, has masculine and feminine traits. And yes, women tend to have certain traits, men tend to have other traits, but we share all of them. And just because a person may be more emotional or more sensitive or more empathic doesn't mean that they are a woman. It just means they have those traits. Anyone can be empathic, anyone can be emotional.
Yeah.
Just because someone is strong-headed or confident or brave doesn't mean they have to be a man. Anyone can be strong or brave or confident. We all are capable of all of those emotions and all of those points of view. So it's that same kind of thing. And puberty is such a horrific experience for every human being I've ever spoken to. I have yet to meet one who said, "Oh, puberty was great." And because it's this upheaval of just, the sexual system's getting turned on. We don't know what the hell is going on with us. Our bodies are changing very fast, very fundamentally. And so there's a lot of
It's confusing.
confusion and also a lot of like, I don't like what's happening to
Yeah.
me. And so that can cause confusion when it comes to gender identity. It's I've been hearing it a lot with a lot of young women, young girls who they're in the throes of puberty and they're not, it's a shitty experience. It's a shitty experience for us all. And some of them are opting into rejecting being a woman because it sucks and because they'd rather be a guy.
Or because it's
Sometimes
not
that doesn't work.
safe. Sometimes it's not safe.
Yes, it's safer. you know Society is still evolving when it comes to the equality between the sexes. It's getting better. It's better than it was in the past. This generation has a better experience than my generation compared to yours, and so on and so on. Like, we are making incremental progress, and sometimes we might overcorrect, sometimes we might not. It's what we've been doing with as humanity for all of time. And so once again, it goes back to temperance from the parents. You know, it's and also educating the kids. It's like, and being like, what's going on? Like, why do you feel like that? What makes you, and be like, I love you and I support you. What's going on? Like, why are you feeling what's going on? And just let the kid vocalize what they're experiencing and just be supportive and just kind of let them figure it out. They will eventually figure it out on, at some time, you know, and if they end up being trans or if they end up being gay or bi or any of the other variations, then you as the parent along with the kid will cross that bridge as it happens.
Yeah.
And but yeah, it's funny because like nowadays the willingness to allow for like things like transition to happen so early is part of this like almost like radical acceptance. The acceptance part is the good part, but it's still the temperance. Would you let a 12-year-old get a tattoo? Most parents would say no. So why would you let a 12-year-old remove their breasts or take hormone blockers? It's just as dramatic to their body.
I think it's because as parents, we are not taught and trained to let our kids experience uncomfortable feelings, which is sometimes
Mm-hmm.
necessary in
Oh yeah.
everything, because life is uncomfortable. You need to build your resilience and your capacity to go through challenges. And because
Yes.
we try to protect them and we react too fast, and that's a missed opportunity for them to mature and develop and end up where they need to be.
100%. The It is a noble goal for a parent to protect their child. It is absolutely noble. It's fundamental in humanity for us to protect the next generation. But if you take that too far, you as the parent will not be there for the rest of the child's life. And the child, part of growing up, part of adolescence and becoming an adult is becoming resilient. And that is a hard lesson for the parent
Oh, yeah.
to let it's to let the kid fall. It's to let the kid get hurt. It's to let the kid get heartbroken. Nothing permanent, nothing super devastating. But you want your child to scrape their knee, literally and figuratively, with childhood issues before they get hit in the face with adult level issues.
Oh, yeah.
Because here's the thing. If you protect your child from everything, you can never protect them from disease, you can never protect them from accidents, and you can never protect them from death. And that is something all of us have to deal with in life. And so all you would be leaving is an adult child who is incapable of caring for themselves. And the life is going to be incredibly cruel to them
Oh,
because
yes.
life is just hard.
Yes. And you as a parent, because my story, my audience know that trying to protect my kids when they started acting out and explore stuff that would potentially could kill them, and pushed me to depression, pushed me to hell, because I am not that powerful that I can protect them 24/7. Like you said, if I'm meant to lose a child in this life, there's nothing I can do that will prevent that. So this is not something for me to even entertain as a thought. I'm doing what I can when they're in, to protect them, to assure their safety. But the rest, I surrender to the universe,
Yes.
because I am not God. I'm not that powerful. And it's the same thing here. There is a journey that they came here to do, and it's important for them to go through that. My question that I ask every guest is about self-love. What's your definition about self-love, of self-love?
My definition of self-love is think about a person in your life that you care about with all of your heart and think about the way that you treat them and the way that you wish them the best and that you would do anything for them to make their lives easier or better or happier. And now imagine that person that you already do that for is yourself. That's how I view self-love, of trying to give you to aim some of that compassion we all naturally have and that love and that care that we give to other people back to us, because it is not an easy thing to do. It is very easy for us to be compassionate to others. It is very hard to be compassionate to ourselves. We are very cruel to ourselves, unfortunately.
Yeah, so that's a beautiful definition. So do you have any practices to practice self-love for yourself, like in your life?
Yeah, it's EFT for sure is a big
Oh, yeah.
component of it. It's certainly, the tapping technique certainly calms down that inner voice. Um, a big, meditation helps, journaling helps. A big thing that I've learned more recently is I learned through a lot of the psychologists and philosophers and things that I've been reading that that voice that we have in our mind, our inner monologue, we assume it is us.
Yeah.
And it isn't 100%. It is a part of us, but it is not us. And that voice in our mind doesn't ever want to shut the hell up. And it will just chat, 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 chat. And it could be anything. It could be, I'm
Yeah.
hungry, I want this, or oh, that's kind of cool, or I want to do that. But it could also be, you're an idiot, you're dumb, you're stupid. And so there is a part of me that has learned to acknowledge the fact of like, that is part of me, but that's not me. And it's just this thing that just yammers on. So there've been lots of times where like, if I start getting negative with myself, I will tell myself, no, like that's not helpful to me. No, move on. Like, stop. I'll literally say to myself, or I'll even say it out loud sometimes if I'm alone. I'll be like, stop it. And if it's still kind of winding around in my head, then I go to something more in depth, like, some like tapping or journaling or something like that, because that voice is trying to tell you something. And a lot of times the negative things it's telling you it's repeating things you've heard from somewhere else.
Oh yeah.
It is your scars. Yeah, it's your conditioning. It's your scars and your wounds talking back to you.
Yeah.
And it's learning to understand that it's your own pain talking, and that you can heal that pain and it will go away. But when it's screaming at you, yeah, it sucks. And it's just having to endure it sometimes.
And that's where EFT comes so handy, because you hear that voice and say, okay, let's go and tap and let that go and love yourself instead. And it's beautiful, the power of EFT.
Yes.
It's something that I use in my life regularly and with my clients, with my kids. It's really a great tool. So I'm glad that you use that in your practice as well. And I want to thank you again for being here today, because
Of course.
there were
Thank
questions
you.
I was curious to ask you. I'm sorry. Vegas here, it's all blooming. Allergies are like up to the roof.
Oh, yeah, that'll start happening to me en masse soon. So.
So if people wanted to connect with you, where do they need to go? And I'll put that in the description as well.
Absolutely. So you can go to my website. It's ericeft.com. So that's Eric with a C. So ERICEFT.com. That's the best way to get in touch with me. I offer a free consultation. So if you just are curious if EFT might be for you, or if you're curious if you and I might be a good fit, it's a 20-minute just phone call or Zoom conversation. And I'm able to assist anyone in the world. I've had clients all over the world, as long as we can line up the time zones. And I'm on the East Coast of the United States. So I've made it work with people in Canada, throughout the United States, and the UK, South Africa. So yeah.
Great. One last word before we part that you want to leave the audience with?
Specifically for parents, as long as you love your child and you tell them that, everything else you can get past. Everything else will be fine. Any wounds, any bruises, they'll heal. But if your kid knows that you love them and that you're never going to abandon them, you're giving them the best gift you can give. Everything else, you'll figure it out.
Perfect. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
That's a beautiful message. And for my audience, I'll be there next week, probably alone. And to piggyback on what Eric just said, love them, and you have what it takes for the rest. Bye for now. Being a single mom can be challenging, but you don't have to face it alone. Join our community at facebook.com/groups/single and doing it all, and receive tools, tips, and free group coaching. And if you like this podcast, please review and rate us on iTunes. I would really appreciate it.